Good evening, everyone. I'm Tiffany Stone Wolberg with the Ward Beecher Planetarium, and welcome back to another Keep Looking Up. With me is our planetarium engineer, Kurt Spivey.
You'll be hearing a lot from me tonight.
And our student workers, Eleni Hansik.
Hello.
And Nishan Adhikari.
Hello.
It looks like we have a good crowd out so far tonight. Thank you, welcome. We're excited to offer this show to you. I think it is an interesting area of astronomy that we don't often have a chance to talk about. So I'm really excited to share with you this particular program. But first, we're going to start with a little look at our current night sky over Youngstown, over the local area. So I will share my screen and we can get started with that. If you guys have any questions or anything you would like to see during the Star Talk, please feel free to let me know. I won't be keeping a close eye on the Facebook chat, but our students can just interrupt me and let me know if there's any questions, please. I am using an open source software to bring a piece of the planetarium to your screen tonight. This is Stellarium. It's a virtual planetarium, one that you could literally fit in your pocket. They have apps for your cell phones that you can download, or you can download it for free on your computers or laptops. So if you're interested, I encourage you to go to stellarium.org to see this. Sorry, I'm seeing a black screen on Facebook. Can you guys confirm that we're still live for me?
I'm seeing it on Facebook.
Okay, great. Then that's just me then. Okay, good deal. So we're on Stellarium. We are facing west, and I have it at the current time. Okay, so this is just shortly after 8 o'clock tonight, April 3rd. And I wanted to show you the sun sets technically, I think it was 7:51 local time. So it's already set, but it takes a while for the sun to completely go down and to get nice and dark for us to see the stars. So we're going to move forward. This is 20:03, that's military time, so 8:03. We're going to move forward to about 9 o'clock. So about the time our show wraps up, maybe a little after. We're going to wait for that sun to go all the way down. There we go. Okay, and this will be your sky, assuming no clouds, over the Youngstown area. The sky doesn't change too much unless you move really far south, or I'm sorry, really far east or west. I'm sorry, north or south. I got that wrong again. So if you lived really far north of Youngstown or really far south, then the constellations or the stars may change just a little, but otherwise the sky will be about the same for you as well if you're tuning in from somewhere outside of Youngstown. So over in the west, I wanted to start over here because we have a couple of interesting things in our sky. I'm going to kind of zoom out like we're laying in our grass, looking up, laying with our backs on the grass, looking up in the sky. You can see over in the western sky, we have really bright stars that almost make a circle in our sky. This is informally called the winter circle. So these are our wintertime constellations, and even though it is getting warmer, the weather's getting nicer, aside from that April Fool's snow that we got a couple days ago, it is getting warmer, right? So it's a good time to go out and look at our wintertime sky. You can actually see it for a couple of hours, only until maybe 11 or so, 10:30 or 11. So you have to go out right after the sun sets if you want to see the winter sky still. It's only going to be up for maybe a few more weeks, and then it'll start to set. It'll be too close to the sun. You won't be able to see anymore. So here's our wintertime sky. And in our winter sky right now is the only visible planet in our evening sky. One thing I really like about Stellarium is that you can zoom in, so you can see the stars as if you were laying on your back in the grass looking up, but you can also see some of the objects as if you had a telescope. So we're going to put our virtual telescope on planet Mars here. Zoom in. Here, let me get that. Okay, There we go. Look at that beautiful planet. Wow, that's an even better view than I get from my telescope. You see that little Phobos, that Phobos label there, that's actually one of Mars's moons. It's on the other side of Mars right now. And this Mars has 2 moons. One is very close to it, Phobos. It's actually spiraling inward and will one day crash into Mars. Mars will be okay, but Phobos will be toast. Deimos, on the other hand, is much further out, and it's actually spiraling outward, and will one day, Mars will lose its gravitational pull, our influence on Deimos, and Deimos will hurtle off somewhere into space. They're both really tiny moons, and anyway, they're not much a whole lot to look at. But one of our rovers, InSight, just recently took a photo. I believe it was of Phobos from Mars. It was really cool. So we have a lot of rovers that have landed on Mars and are doing some really exciting science. If you want to know a ton about that, we just did a Mars show a couple weeks ago. You can look back on our shows here on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, WB Planetarium. We archive all of our Keep Looking Ups, and we have a show just about our beautiful red planet neighbor. So that's the only planet that we can see in our evening sky right now. And it is right next to, let's see, it's right above our constellation Taurus, the bull. There we go. So it was kind of between Taurus's 2 horns. So I'll put the artwork up so you can kind of imagine that a little better. This bright red star, Aldebaran, is the eye of the bull. Elnath, you'll hear a little more about that when during Kurt's talk. And that's one of the bright stars that makes the point of his horns. Oops, wrong button. So this is Taurus the bull. He's a fall-time, wintertime constellation. The king of our wintertime skies is Orion, the hunter, who's locked in battle with Taurus the bull. Orion and Taurus, many of the stories surrounding these constellations and much of the constellations that you see in the sky are originated from Greek mythology. But the star names are a little more peculiar. Aldebaran, Betelgeuse, those are not Greek names. And again, we'll get into that a little more with Kurt. I've always found that to be curious and fascinating, how and why we name things the way we do in the sky. Betelgeuse is one of my favorite stars because it is a red giant star. And it is just an enormous star. We also know it is very old and it's going to die one day soon, but soon for a star is a few million years, and a million years is of course a million years for us. It's a really long time. But about a year and a half ago, yes, it's already been almost 2 years ago, if you remember this, Betelgeuse got visibly dim in our sky. It's a very, very bright star. It's actually about as bright or a little brighter than Mars. Aldebaran's a red star too. We sort of have like this red shining triangle in our sky at the moment. Yeah, so Betelgeuse got really noticeably dim and everyone was freaking out because we know that when Betelgeuse does ultimately meet its fate, it will die in a massive supernova explosion, which is very rare. Most stars pass quietly, right? They meet their maker very sort of subtly. It's not something that we would notice from our sky. Betelgeuse is different. Its supernova would light up our sky for probably several months, and it would be enormously bright. It'd be quite a show, and it would forever change our sky. So something to look forward to, but probably not in our lifetimes. Betelgeuse did brighten back up and obviously did not supernova. We think it something having to do with its nearing the end of its life was the reason for that, but we're not entirely sure. That's why I love Betelgeuse. It's full of mystery and intrigue. So that's a lot of our, oh, there we go. Sorry, that's all the constellation labels there. But Cleaning up a little bit our western sky. This is what you can see over in your west right after the sun sets. We're going to move forward to the north here briefly. If you have come to the planetarium before, or if you've seen a lot of our Keep Looking Ups, we've talked a lot about our northern sky. This is where we have our what we call circumpolar constellations, because they circle the pole, the north, above the North Pole of our planet Earth. So they just sort of circle in our northern sky. They're not seasonal. We can see these all year round. Perhaps the most famous group of stars in the north sky, 3 stars here make its handle, 4 stars here make its cup. This is the Big Dipper inside the constellation Ursa Major. As you can see the Big Dipper there. That section of Ursa Major is quite bright. The 7 stars that make the Big Dipper are very, very bright. So when you start dealing with light pollution, basically since the invention of electricity, we've had light shining up, making it harder to see some of those more faint stars like the feet of Ursa Major and many other stars in the sky. The shapes of the constellations, the stars wash out and the shapes become diluted and harder to spot. So we start to get these different patterns emerging out of just the brightest stars. So that's where we have the Big Dipper. The 2 stars in the Big Dipper's cup here, we nicknamed those the pointer stars because if you draw a line through them, they point to Polaris or the North Star. This star always points you exactly north. It's also in the handle of the Little Dipper or the tail of the Little Bear, Ursa Minor. And so all these constellations in the north sky, I'm going to actually just click on them so you can see them. Cassiopeia, she was a queen, her husband Cepheus, and sneaking between are Big and Little Bear, Draco the dragon, or sometimes Draco the serpent. These constellations, as the Earth rotates, these appear to just sort of rotate or circle around our North Star, and we see them all year round. But I wanted to point those out because our Big Dipper here, we will get rid of these other ones, but focus on, well, there we go. We'll focus on just the Big Dipper, because it can help you find the North Star, yes, but it can also help you find some other stars that are rising in the east. You see how the handle of the Big Dipper sort of curves or makes an arc in the sky? You can extend that arc out and arc to a very bright star called Arcturus.
Charles, if you're watching, this one's for you.
That's right, Charles. For all of our, for Charles out there and all of our folks that come to our planetarium or see my shows in the planetarium regularly, you've probably heard this before. So you arc to Arcturus, and once you're at Arcturus, you can continue this arc. You can spike like a railroad spike to this bright star here called Spica. And so Arcturus is in the constellation Bootes, the shepherd. I kind of think it looks like a kite or an ice cream cone, but that's supposed to be a shepherd. And then you spike down to this bright star Spica, which is in actually one of the largest constellations in the sky, Virgo. She's not completely risen, but most of her is. And so this is an easy way to remember much of your springtime sky. You find the Big Dipper's handle, you arc to Arcturus, spike to Spica. So for Charles and everyone who's been to my shows before, say it with me. You are, hey students, you guys ready? You gonna say it with me? Say it with me. You arc to Arcturus and spike
to Spica.
That's right. Don't forget it. All right. And next to Virgo, just really adorable little constellation. One of my students in the past says this looks like a little T-Rex footprint, but it is Corvus, the crow. It's supposed to look like a little bird. And then, of course, right above our arc to Arcturus and spike to Spica is the king of our springtime skies. This is Leo the lion. Very easy to spot with the head and mane of Leo It makes a backwards question mark or a sickle in the sky. Then we have the rectangle that makes his body and the triangle that makes his tail. He's quite easy to see. Very big and bright in your sky. But Bootes and Virgo are difficult to make out, not only because their shapes are very abstract. I think they're really difficult to imagine, a shepherd and a woman, but many of the stars are dim. Leo, on the other hand, very bright, very easy to find. Corvus is also very easy to find. All of these stars are very, very bright. So, oh, there's Charles. Yep, you got it, right? Okay, good. Glad we weren't alone. Don't forget it, Arcturus, Spike to Spica, and that's most of your springtime sky right there over in the east. So your spring, the reason why we call these spring constellations is because they rise in the east in the spring, and then they are up in your sky. If you go out at midnight, 1 o'clock, they're going to be real high in your sky, and even right before the sun sets, they're going to be over towards the west. So you can see them all night long. The winter sky, on the other hand, sorry, we're kind of overhead here. I'm going to turn back to the west. See our winter circle? It's over in the west. It's about to set. The sun just set in the west, and our winter constellations are going to set in the west. You can't see them for very long. If you want to see them all night long, you go out and see them during the winter time. So that's how we have our seasonal constellations. And to tell you a little bit more about our constellations and why they're important and why we name them what we do, I'm going to hand this over to Kurt.
Thank you, Tiffany. And this is actually one of those areas that has always intrigued me in astronomy because, I mean, we're talking about the InSight rover. We've just imaged a black hole. There's now questions out there that might be questioning Einsteinian relativity. Some theorists think it's feasibly possible to time travel now. So all this cutting edge science is going on. However, astronomy is also by far and away the oldest of all the sciences. People have been looking at the stars since before we even started writing stuff down. And a lot of the nomenclature and things we use comes from that ancient history. So it's both the newest and the oldest of all the sciences. As Tiffany mentioned, this is not an area that we talk about often, and that's where all this stuff comes from. So I'm going to start my presentation here and come up like so. And we're going to talk about why we have Greek constellations with Latin names and why so many of the star names are Arabic within the constellations and how we came to the constellations that are officially recognized today. So with that, some of you may have heard my stump speech at some point. If there are some folks out there that were at some of my other planetariums, I've been doing a version of this talk at gatherings for a number of years, but I hope you guys enjoy it. Throughout the centuries, people have looked to the stars for navigation, to mark time, and to preserve their myths and folklore. To make this task easier, they used their imagination, they played dot to dot with all the stars, and they made up stories about what they saw. Today, we call those recognizable shapes the constellations. Astronomers now officially recognize 88 constellations that cover the entire sky in the northern and southern hemisphere. There are 14 men and women, 19 land animals, 10 water creatures, and believe it or not, this is an early version of Cancer the crab. At one time, he was Cancer the crayfish. There are 9 birds, 2 insects. This is Musca the fly. Let me move myself out of the way here just so you can see Musca there. There is a dragon that Tiffany just showed you, Draco in the nighttime sky, 2 centaurs, a serpent, 1 head of hair. Yes, there's a head of hair in the sky. It's called Coma Berenices, also in our spring sky. A flying horse, a river, and 29 inanimate objects represented in the nighttime sky. Now, for those of you who are quick in math, you'll discover that is actually a total of 90 figures in the sky. There are 2 figures, the Gemini twins and the fish Pisces, which are attached by a rope, that have 2 figures in one constellation, and that gets us our 88 total that we see today. Now, many of these patterns were named in honor of heroes and objects, but not necessarily because they necessarily look like the objects they're meant to represent. We do similar things today. The state of Washington was named for George Washington, and while it's named for him, it doesn't really look like George Washington. But the constellations we use today, where did they come from? The oldest description we have comes of constellations we know of comes from a poem called The Phenomena, written around 270 BC by a Greek poet. And I apologize for all the Greek members of the community. I am terrible with pronouncing ancient Greek names, so you'll have to forgive me. I believe it is pronounced Aratus. It might be Aratus, but I think it is Aratus. It is clear from this poem, however, that the constellations mentioned came from a long time before. Nobody is exactly sure where, when, or by whom they were invented, yet a little detective work can give us a pretty good idea. Of the 44 constellations mentioned in the poem, there are none around the South Celestial Pole, the point directly above the Earth's South Pole. This area must have been below the horizon at all times for the constellation makers. From the size of this uncharted area, we can determine that the inventors lived near the latitude of 36 degrees north, which is south of Greece, north of Egypt, but similar in latitude to Sumeria, which is now known as Iraq. In addition, the constellation free zone is not centered on the current South Celestial Pole. Because we are spinning in space once a day, the Earth wobbles as it goes, as it spins. This effect is known as precession. And on the chart on the right here, you can see right now we can use Polaris as the North Star. We've been able to use it for about the past 500 years. We'll be able to use it for about another 500 years, and then it will drift off. Well, judging by where the uncharted area is centered on the place in the sky where the South Celestial Pole would have pointed, that's around 2000 BC, and that date matches the time of the Sumerians. So it seems likely that the Greek constellations originated from the Sumerians, and from there, the stories were somehow made their way to Egypt, where early Greek scholars first heard and wrote about them. In 150 AD, the Greek scientist Claudius Ptolemy, who was in charge of the Great Library at Alexandria, published a book containing a summary of Greek astronomical knowledge. It contained a catalog of 1,022 stars organized into 48 constellations that form the basis of our modern constellation system. Now, to name the stars, the Greek tradition, I think I missed the slide here. Let me back up. I might have missed the slide. Okay. Well, anyway, yes, this is the slide I want. Ptolemy used the Greek tradition of naming the stars by their position in the constellation. For example, he refers to one star by the description of the reddish one on the southern eye, a star we now know as Aldebaran in Taurus the Bull. But this system does get a little complicated. He refers to one star in the constellation of Argo the ship as the northernmost 2 stars close together over the little shield in the poop. Try saying that 3 times fast. Why then, if we adopted the constellations from the Greeks, do they have Latin names? And why are so many star names like Aldebaran Arabic? Well, when the Roman Empire ended and the library at Alexandria was ransacked, the knowledge that was contained there was kept alive by the Arabs, who translated and preserved Greek and Roman books. This gentleman is Al-Sufi, one of the greatest Arabic astronomers, and he published his own version of Ptolemy's catalog in the late 10th century. He introduced many of the individual star names. such as Aldebaran. But for centuries, Bedouin Arabs had given names to bright stars. For example, Betelgeuse, which they regarded single stars as people or animals. Many of the original meanings of these words were forgotten even in Al-Sufi's time, but other star names were direct translation of Ptolemy's descriptions. For example, the star name Fomalhaut comes from the Arabic for mouth of the southern fish, star in Pisces Austrinus, one of our water creatures in the sky. After the 10th century, the works of Ptolemy were reintroduced to Europe by the Islamic Arabs, and Ptolemy's work was translated from Arabic into Latin, the scientific language of the day. Thus, we know the title of Ptolemy's work by its Arabic title, the Almagest, and not by its original Greek title. And it also explains why we have Greek constellations with Latin names and stars within them with Arabic names. So that's where we get this system that we use today with these naming, but that is only 48 of the constellations. Most of our other traditions of naming the constellations comes from the attempt to draw the sky with paper star charts. And the earliest surviving paper star chart dates from 1440. It is known as the Vienna manuscript and is part of a larger, I need to back that up. It is part of a much larger anonymous astronomical work called De Compositione Sphere Solide. The sky was projected from the eclipse poles, so the border was adorned with the 12 signs of the zodiac. As you look around this chart, there's Scorpius, there's Virgo, there's Leo. They were around the edge, so it wasn't centered on the North Pole like we do today. Also, the ecliptic circle was subdivided into sections spanning 30 degrees, one section for each zodiac sign. And this form of drawing charts was to dominate celestial mapping for the next 400 years. The remaining 40 constellations were added relatively recently. We're going to start in the year 1595. Until the late 1500s, when European sailors started traveling south of the equator, they had to navigate by 100-year-old crude drawings made by the Italian navigator Amerigo Vespucci, whom the Americas were named after, I might add, from the 1400s. In 1595, Dutchman Petrus Planicus asked this gentleman, Pieter Dirkzoon Keizer, chief navigator on the ship Hollandia, to make observations that would fill in the gaps around the south celestial poles. And this was a very urgent need for sailors who were sailing into southern waters. Keizer, along with the help of another Dutchman, who has a very impressive beard, his name is Frederick D. Houtman, reasonably mapped skies and formulated 12 constellations named after animals, people, and shipboard instruments and mythological figures. Keizer died in Java before they could complete the work, but D. Houtman returned to Europe and delivered their catalog of 135 southern stars to Planicus, who wasted no time in publishing the new celestial spheres featuring the new constellations. So the basis of our modern star mapping techniques, which is called uranography, and the reason for that, and the reason the planet is named what it is, Uranus was the Roman god of the sky. So the study of the sky was uranography. It has nothing to do with bodily functions, okay? But the current way we use things came from a single star atlas published by this gentleman. His name was Johannes Bayer, and his work was called the Uranometra, which was published in Bavaria in 1603. He based his work on a manuscript by Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe that was published in 1598. It contained more than 1,700 stars of magnitude 1 through 6, plus 325 unformed stars, which were not associated with any of the constellations. The positions were far more accurate than any measurements that came before it. The innovation that Uranometra is known for is something known as the Bayer letters. This is what we still use today when we do stars, names on stars. The Greek leader and the genitive or possessive form of the Latin name were used to designate the star. For example, this star right here, the brightest star in the constellation Vega, in Lyra, is called Vega, which is the informal name, but its official name really is Alpha Lyrae. In some heavily populated regions, when the 24 Greek characters were exhausted, Bayer repeated this process using lowercase and then uppercase letters from the Roman alphabet. But Bayer was not totally unambiguous with this. For stars that fell on the border between adjoining constellations, he chose to assign 2 Greek letters for some unknown reason. The star that Tiffany mentioned earlier, this one right here, is El Nath. But in the Uranometra, this is both Beta Lyrae and Gamma Aurigae. So the star actually has 2 names officially, according to Bayer. Now, there has been much debate whether Bayer designated stars alphabetically by decreasing order of brightness. The answer is no, he never said he did, but just kind of looks that way at first glance. In many cases, what Bayer did was call the brightest star in a constellation Alpha and then work to the head, from the head to the feet of the constellation. Other times, Bayer's lettering follows no apparent scheme at all. Take Sagittarius, for example. Its visually brightest star, Caus Australis, is actually labeled Epsilon in the Uranometra, and its second brightest, Nunci, is of all things Sigma, all the way down here in the Greek alphabet. Its 2 brightest, its alpha and beta stars are Rukbat and Arcab. They are right here and right here in the constellation. They're not visually striking, but they do form an important key element of the Archer's outline. Now, so it got a little confusing even in the Uranometra, but not all the confusing labels were Bayer's fault. The present day constellations of Vela the sail, Pupus the stern, Carina the keel, and Fixus the mariner's compass were originally part of this enormous constellation you see in the center, which was Argo Navis, or the ship that the Argonauts took when Jason went to go get the Golden Fleece. I do want to point out one thing. This is Pupus back here. It's known as the poop deck on a ship. The constellation that is right above the poop deck is Canis Major, the big dog. So the poop deck is right under the tail of the big dog. So don't say that the ancient people that came up with this stuff didn't have a sense of humor. Because of this constellation being split up, however, neither Vela or Pupus contain an alpha or beta star, and there are gaps in Carina's labels because of that too. But despite all its advances, Uranometra did have its drawbacks. Bayer chose to illustrate many of his figures from the back, even though the star patterns themselves were depicted as seen in the sky. This made traditional names inaccurate. For example, the brightest star in Orion is Rigel. We know it as his left foot, but the way that, and this is from the Uranometra, Rigel is drawn, it's drawn as his right foot. And the reason for that was before star charts were drawn down, what people made were celestial spheres. Like we have Earth globes today, globes were made on with the stars on them. However, they assumed that we were on the inside, so all the patterns on the outside of the globe were drawn backwards, so it would be seen as if you were outside the Earth looking back down. And Bayer, for some reason, chose to illustrate his figures like that. And it was a tough habit to break for a lot of star chart makers. But that gets us a lot of the constellations, but not all of the 88 we use today. Almost a century later, this gentleman named Johannes Helvetius invented a couple of constellations. He was from Poland, and he used them to fill places on his star atlas that seemed too empty. These new northern constellations, such as Lacerta, the lizard, and Veleptula, the fox, are difficult to find even if you know where to look for them. Our next advances in uranography happened about 100 years later, and they came from this gentleman, John Flamsteed, around 70 years after Bayer, actually. He created the most accurate catalog for star magnitudes and positions to date, containing nearly 3,000 stars, which was published in 725, 6 years after his death. His star drawings were in a grid system centered in projection on the Earth's equator, which was much easier for astronomers using telescopes to use as chart, and it corresponded with the apparent rotation of the heavens as seen from the Earth. However, this guy right here, this guy is the reason that we astronomers have to put up with the terms right ascension and declination instead of sky longitude and sky latitude. Right ascension refers to longitude. It's as you're looking north, the stars appear to ascend from the right. That's where that came from. And declination, I don't know how he got that out of sky latitude. It would have been a lot easier just to be sky longitude and sky latitude. So this guy, anyway. One of the other things that he did was he used something known as sinusoidal projection to minimize distortion in constellation patterns found in earlier works. It's kind of like when you look at a map like this. This map of the Earth has sinusoidal projection because the Earth is a globe and this is flat. That's why Greenland here looks so huge, but it does fix a lot of the distortion by using that. Now we move on to 1750 to 1752. This gentleman is named Nicolas Louis de la Caille. He was a French astronomer who lived in Cape Town, South Africa, and he during these years, and he created 14 new constellations and named them after tools and inventions he thought were important. Among these were the telescope. Go figure, an astronomer put a telescope in the nighttime sky. But he also thought microscopium, the microscope, was very important. And one of my favorite constellations in the entire nighttime sky, this is Antilla, the air pump. And I guess that was a pretty big deal back in 1750 to 1752 that air pumps were invented. Now, throughout the century, other astronomers and map makers have added new star figures to their charts or renamed old ones. Most of these did not last longer than their creators, but every now and then you can find one on an antique star chart. For example, in 1687, this is Edmund Halley of the Halley's Comet fame, invented a constellation out of Argo, the ship known as Robur Carolinium, or Charles's Oak, in honor of King Charles II of England. However, de la Caille refused to recognize it, and it never caught on. Over the years, there have been a battery, a cat, and even a flying squirrel in the nighttime sky. Hey, rookie, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat. That's for all of you old folks and young people. Probably have no idea who I'm talking about there, but anyway. Now, pictorial constellation maps became obsolete when cameras were invented in the 19th century, and star positions and magnitudes could be measured with greater accuracy. But many of our modern conventions can be traced directly to these earlier works. In its first meeting in 1922, the International Astronomical Union, or IAU, which is astronomy's governing body, officially adopted the list of 88 constellations that we use today. Then this gentleman named Edwin Hubble came along. So 8 years later, in 1930, definite boundaries were established well beyond the star pattern so that every star, nebula, or galaxy, no matter how faint, fell within the boundaries of a constellation. So that's where our current stuff came from, but these aren't the only patterns in the nighttime sky. There were many people throughout the years that looked to the nighttime sky and made up patterns about what they saw. These are just the officially recognized. That's why when you see these boundaries, whenever I'm telling you about constellations, I'm saying use your imagination just like ancient people did and make your own patterns so you can explore the nighttime sky a lot of the ways that your ancestors did. It's a lot of fun to do that. And I hope you enjoyed finding out where a lot of this stuff we use today came from. And if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to take them if anything's come up while I was talking.
Yes, Charles has a question.
Okay.
Have any more recently discovered stars been given names or grouped in a pattern? Or are we limited to only what we can see with the naked eye or aid of a telescope?
No, actually, every time a star gets named, it still uses pretty much the bare classification when they name a star. But we've run out of Greek letters, we've run out of Roman letters, and we've run out of capital Roman letters. So now we go to numbers after that. When you see very dim stars that are found today, they're called things like 47 Draconis or something along those lines, but it still follows the bare pattern. Now, the way the constellation boundaries are done, there cannot be any new constellations in the sky, because when they established those boundaries in 1930, they completely covered the northern and southern hemisphere. So no other official constellations can be added because of that.
Great. I love that getting into sort of the history of astronomy, because as you said, we talk a lot about the news and what's happening now, but there's so much history behind this subject too.
And we didn't bring it up here, but really astrology and astronomy were the same thing until Galileo came on in the 1600s, and then science went this way and astrology went actually this way, but that's a whole nother story. But that's one of the reasons why it's the oldest science, because people were always looking to the night sky for something.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. We had a couple that we answered in the chat, which are interesting. If you guys want to peruse those later.
I got a bone to pick with John Flamsteed if you couldn't figure that out from my talk.
Yeah, maybe
I hate right ascension and declination.
It still confuses me, honestly. I mean, ascension.
You don't know how long it took me to get that explanation of right ascension right in my head. It took me most of my time in college to figure that out.
Yeah.
So.
We have an interesting question about the mythology behind Orion. Why does Orion appear to be fighting a bull?
I do not know the origins of every one of the stories. I don't know if he was drawn that way just because he was next to Taurus the bull. The story of him going up in the sky has more to do with, if you've ever seen our show, Legends of the Night Sky Orion, you can learn a lot more about that. He had a fling with a goddess named Artemis, and actually he was killed twice. The snake that's in the sky ties into that story. The Pleiades tie into that story. But they never actually mentioned in any of the stories I've seen of Orion why he is fighting Taurus in the nighttime sky, which comes from another myth and one of Jupiter's moons, Callisto, and the bull. I'm not going to go into all of the stories, but it's a completely separate myth from the Orion myth. So I actually don't know, other than he just happened to be in that part of the sky. Now, this is actually one of the things. The biggest hero in Greek mythology was Hercules. You can cover the entire sky and talk about his 12 labors and everything, but the constellation Hercules is actually really wimpy. It's not far from where Tiffany was showing you with Bootes in the nighttime sky. It's kind of like between the spring and summer skies. It's very hard to find. Why they didn't make the stars of Orion Hercules, I've got no clue, because that would have been a better story.
Yeah, Hercules is easy to spot in really dark skies. Yeah. So maybe, they ancient Greeks didn't have light pollution. So perhaps that wasn't on the forefront of their minds. I can't remember the details of the Orion story, but there is a lesser known, or I guess, not in his main storyline, story about him tying up with Taurus the bull. And it's my understanding, so on the back of Taurus the bull is the Pleiades, which is also nicknamed the Seven Sisters. And it is my understanding that Taurus the bull was protecting the Seven Sisters from Orion. So he's not always such a
Uh,
great guy in all of the myths.
Yeah, the ones I've heard, I've never heard that particular tie-in, other
Yeah.
than, the story that Taurus and Jupiter / Zeus are synonymous, and maybe it was Zeus protecting the seven sisters. I don't know.
Perhaps. I can't remember all of the details. I did read that story, but it's been many years now, so I'm going to go look that up tonight. Thank you for bringing that up, Ricardo.
And the other thing about these myths is there are inconsistencies in the Greek texts. So you can read one story one way. Like I said, Orion dies twice. And in the one story with the snake, he doesn't come back. But then there's the whole story with Artemis where he's back again and something else happens to kill him. So
yeah, so these stories are passed down. I mean, just like in other cultures, these stories of the sky are passed down, for generations. And of course, the details will get mixed up, and we can argue today about what they are. But some of those details do get lost or exaggerated or changed. You might even hear these stories told differently even today between different groups. So. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions. Students, you can feel free to interrupt if any pop up, but we'll wrap up by sort of introducing our next Keep Looking Up. We like to give you a little sneak preview of that. Our next Keep Looking Up in 2 Saturdays, so 2 weeks from today, we will be we'll have a guest. The president of the Mahoning Valley Astronomical Society, Jody McCullough, is going to come and talk about astrophotography.
Yay!
It's going to be great. I'm so excited. I'm excited to see Jody, and I think it's an interesting topic that a lot of people will like. Even if you don't have a telescope or you don't have a lot of big fancy equipment, Jody's going to talk about how to get started and what you can do. What is astrophotography? What kind of pictures you could take, and how to get started in that field if you're interested. So please join us 2 weeks from today. And until then, happy Easter. And I think is there anything we should add, Kurt, before we wrap up? Can you think of anything?
Well, we've both been vaccinated. So
yay!
We're getting closer and closer. We still
are halfway. We're first dose.
We're halfway.
One dose in.
One dose in. But we are still, depending on how surges happen and the stuff does, we're following the state guidelines, and we're still looking to try to be back in some form this fall in the planetarium. So I know everybody's anxious to hear when we're back. That's what we're shooting for right now.
Yes. And so in the meantime, we'll keep seeing you here on our social media channels. Thank you guys for tuning in with us tonight. And remember to keep looking up.